The common Mwananchi is saying that the country's economy is doing so badly, yet we are still borrowing. But let me bring in an important point that you had raised earlier on before you took a commercial break. You said that when a country is borrowing or when an individual is borrowing, it's good that when you borrow the money that you're taking, you should also look at a way on this sort of profit it needs to give you as a way of repaying back your loan. Is that the same case for Kenya, our borrowing culture, when it comes to most of our borrowing is for infrastructure? And just as Elvis Kosgei said, the Nairobi-Naivasha railway, which has been termed as a railway to nowhere, which the president said it should not be said like a railway to nowhere, we're supposed to be paying back that loan as from this month. So in terms of our borrowing for infrastructure and in terms of the long-term repayment, are we doing badly?
Thank you, Brenda. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much. I think that's a pertinent question because, as we did discuss earlier, if there is no return on investment, it is basically sunk. It's a sunken cost. It's a cost we will never recover. I think whether or not the investments that have been made will ever return money, I think is a big question out there. My own hunch is that some of the projects could have been thought a bit more carefully because let's take an example of the SGR. Long before even the Naivasha-Nairobi extension was done, already the SGR is struggling. It's not able to break even. It has not broken even. And therefore, we are having to pay for money that we are not collecting back. In terms of, of course, they all have the issues that were around SGR, including its construction, the manpower used there, how much of that money actually went into the Kenyan economy, or how much of it actually just remained, within China. Somebody would give an example of just almost like, just swiping a credit card where the money remains somewhere else. I think it's that. It's hard to pin all the development that has been happening in this country one-on-one with the amount of money we have borrowed. I mean, I gave an example. I gave the fact earlier that in a 10 trillion economy, if you inject 8.9 trillion, that's massive. It's like if you earn 100,000 and somebody gave you an extra 80,000, there's a lot that you can do with that 80,000 for a fact. In terms of additional resource. So apart from SGR and LAPSET and a couple of roads that are going on there, somebody gets lost in terms of what else is being done with that money, and that's where the question is, and therefore that tells you that the revenue, the amount of money we are paying back, is not commensurate to what we are making from the investments. That there is a challenge. I think it should have been faced a bit better. It should have been thought. I know there was a whole debate that happened around even the cost-benefit analysis of SGR. And the fact that, of course, SGR and even the old line ran parallel next to each other, that could have been thought about a bit more carefully. But we've also heard in some of the political circles just about the gimmicks that go around the borrowing. And some of the conversations and who makes money out of that borrowing and all those kind of very painful examples, including of some of the corruption that we have here. For me, those all add up to the fact that where the money is being spent, it's likely never to be recovered.
All right, so Dr.
And to clear the debt. And that then means in the long haul, we are likely to be in a fairly difficult situation.
All right, and so Dr. Rugo, when the government was convincing Parliament to approve that ceiling, that ceiling of 9 trillion that we have now. And so Treasury is thinking of going back to Parliament again and asking them to put that ceiling to 12 trillion. And it caused a lot of political uproar in terms of politicians, members of Parliament asking, we need to block the loopholes of corruption as a way of saving money, as a way of being accountable. Are we seeing members of Parliament doing that accountability properly this time round? When government goes back to them to ask the members of Parliament, give us a 12 trillion shillings ceiling?
I want to start by saying I think Parliament has slept in their job. and therefore coming to jump at the 12 trillion request is a bit late in the day. And this is my argument, that one, every year, reports are done that raise concerns that our deficit, because where does public debt borrowing rise from? It rises from a lack of balancing between revenue and expenditure. So our public debt, our deficit, so the difference between how much we expect to collect and how much we are spending, has been growing year on year. And year on year, Parliament, for me, the one that was even more painful was the one for this year, for the financial year 2020-2021, that the committee did make all observations that the deficit at a time of COVID, that deficit was unmanageable, was untenable, but still went ahead and approved the budget. And therefore, by approving the budget, they approved the deficit. And of course, when the debt management strategy paper comes to them, they also approve it. And therefore, they have allowed the bad manners to continue for too long, in my opinion. And I think that is where they are responsible. They are responsible for what happens in this country.
So,
but having
Dr.
said
Rugo,
that, I think the accountability checks of where is the money being spent for the different projects has not been effected has not been done as effectively as ought to have been done, and that's a challenge we have placed in Parliament. Whenever we have presented memorandums to them, every year we have called on them to be a bit more vigilant, to be a bit more involved, to be a bit more, because they are our eyes. That's where we elect them. But let me come to the 12 trillion limit. Now, the report that was presented in Parliament, which I read, suggested that the ceiling of 9 trillion was being put in place, but was not to be achieved immediately, but rather was to be achieved by 2022-2023. Now, the report you just looked at and the one you just presented at the beginning of this program shows clearly that we already, by the end of this financial year, we are going to be at 9 trillion. In other words, the problem is not the ceiling. The problem is the prudence and the discipline to live within our code, to live within our means.
In fact, Dr. Rugo, I was about to ask you. Yeah, I was about to ask you that because, you know, when we look at the comparison of the leadership of the former president, that is Mwai Kibaki, and the current president, Uhuru Kenyatta, there's been a lot of borrowing. And so what did the former president do right as a way of taming our borrowing culture? And what is the president not doing right now as a way that has led us to that, you know, borrowing year in, year out to fund our budget and various infrastructural projects?
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. Let's be fair. When Vision 2030 was crafted, and I was part of the team that did the first medium-term plan implementation program, we anticipated a framework where borrowing was going to be a necessary means of achieving some of the infrastructural projects. But the arrangement then was what we call a public-private partnership. Now, where the public would give the inputs of what the public already has, one critical one being land, which is a
All right, apologies for that.
Held in trust by them. But
all right.
Can you hear me?
Dr. Rugo, I can hear you. We're having a bit of some freezing on your side, but let me just kindly give us your final feedback on the question that I'd asked you, because we need to wind up.
Sure. Good. So what I was saying is that that borrowing was anticipated. Let's be fair. That in this, after Mwai Kibaki, even if he had stayed for for a longer period, borrowing was anticipated. What was not anticipated is that first, you would borrow without phasing out the kind of projects that need to be done. All projects did not need to be done at the same time. But secondly, that there would be accountability and a transparent framework of the kind of borrowing we are doing, and that the private input and the public input will be balanced. What has ended up happening is that what is private input is purely money, which is what I talked about, commercial borrowing. What do I think? I think in closing, it's important for us to emphasize that unless there is proper accountability and prudence within the people who have been given the public trust to be able to run our public finance management system, then the struggles will be long. I think
Right, you've been talking to Dr. Abraham Rugo, who is the country manager for the International Budget Partnership. Sorry for that freezing that he's having on his side, but at least we've had it from him what the country needs to do as a way of, just taming our borrowing culture that we have, the debt that we have. We still need to fund the budget for the fiscal year 2021-2022. Bringing me to the end of the conversation that we've had with you since 9 a.m. to now. Just a few minutes to 11 a.m. for Mashinan with Cecilia Akasho-Madhuva. Thanks to the men and women behind the scene who make KTN News Center a success. My name is Brenda Zeda Radido. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. God bless and keep safe.